I'm sure.
Thousands of Israeli hostage families staged another powerful protest outside the official residence of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem on Wednesday, September 3, 2025. The demonstration highlighted the growing frustration with the ongoing war in Gaza and the slow progress in hostage negotiations. Protesters demanded Netanyahu immediately approve a deal with Palestine, which they believe is the only path to securing the safe return of their loved ones. From the early morning hours, demonstrators lit fires inside recycling containers, creating a dramatic symbol of defiance at the gates of power. Reports from local media indicated that one of the fires spread briefly, causing a small blaze about 100 meters from the Prime Minister's residence before being quickly contained by firefighters. Protesters also set up tents, reinforcing their determination to remain in place until their demands are met. Families of hostages emphasized their deep frustration with the lack of progress. They believe the only way to guarantee the safety of their relatives is to end military operations in Gaza and pursue a peace agreement. Analysts warn that this wave of protests may intensify political pressure on Netanyahu, who has so far shown no signs of rushing to meet these demands. International observers are paying close attention, as the protest represents not only a domestic crisis but also a powerful civilian movement. The ring of fire and the makeshift encampments outside Netanyahu's residence have become a symbol of public resolve, and may mark a turning point forcing Israel's government to reconsider its military and diplomatic strategies. The protest grew more heated as the morning progressed. Thousands of demonstrators carried banners, posters, and placards, amplifying their calls for peace and the release of hostages. The crowd stressed that their presence was not only about securing freedom for their loved ones, but also about demanding an end to the war in Gaza. Tensions escalated when protesters ignited additional fires in metal containers, their flames reflecting a sense of urgency. Although firefighters contained the spread, the dramatic images of burning containers and rows of tents sent a powerful message across the nation. International media outlets quickly picked up the story, broadcasting images of defiant families standing against the government. The hostage families reiterated that each day without an agreement increases the danger faced by those in captivity. For many, this was not merely a political demonstration but a desperate act of survival. Their encampments outside Netanyahu's home symbolized a readiness to endure the hardships of protest until a breakthrough is achieved. Political observers cautioned that this growing movement could destabilize Netanyahu's position. The Prime Minister now faces mounting social unrest while balancing national security concerns. The protests reflect a crucial shift. The Gaza conflict is no longer confined to military strategy, but has transformed into a social crisis threatening Israel's domestic stability. The Jerusalem protest is part of a broader wave of demonstrations organized by hostage families across Israel. They argue that the government has moved too slowly in negotiations, forcing them to escalate their tactics to capture the public's attention. Demonstrators underscored that their actions were not symbolic stunts. By establishing tents and keeping fires burning, they demonstrated their determination to remain in place until their demands are met. The scene outside Netanyahu's residence grew increasingly tense, with security forces patrolling the area to prevent violence. Families emphasized that every delay in negotiations prolongs the suffering of those held captive. They demanded that Netanyahu immediately accept a peace deal with Palestine, calling it the only viable path forward. Their message was clear: the government must act, or face relentless public pressure. International media highlighted the dramatic nature of the protests: fires, tents, and thousands of voices chanting for peace. Analysts suggested that this highly visible movement could shift global opinion and increase diplomatic pressure on Israel. Netanyahu, they said, now stands at a crossroads: act swiftly or risk intensifying public outrage at home. Outside the Prime Minister's residence, the protests continued to escalate. Tents multiplied, fires glowed brighter, and the crowd swelled in determination. Citizens of Jerusalem gathered nearby, some in solidarity and others merely observing the tense standoff. For demonstrators, the symbolism was deliberate. The flames represented urgency, while the tents signaled endurance. Protesters explained that dramatic measures were the only way to confront the government's slow-moving diplomacy. To them, each day without progress meant more suffering for their families. Israeli security forces maintained a strong presence, monitoring the fires and preventing the crowd from breaching barriers. While they managed to contain small flare-ups, they could not extinguish the growing momentum of the movement. Images of defiant families camped outside Netanyahu's residence spread rapidly across international news outlets. Analysts stressed that the protests added a social dimension to the Gaza conflict. What had once been seen as a military campaign now carried deep domestic implications. The persistence of the hostage families, combined with international media attention, may push Israel's government to reconsider its strategy sooner than anticipated. Public pressure mounted as hostage families declared their protest indefinite. The tents around Netanyahu's residence were no longer temporary. They had become a semi-permanent fixture of defiance. Fires burned as symbols of frustration and determination, underscoring the urgency of their demands. The families voiced their despair openly. Each passing day without progress, they said, endangered the lives of their loved ones. Only a peace agreement with Palestine, they insisted, could guarantee the hostages' safe return. Their protest was not driven by politics, but by pain, fear, and the desperate will to save their relatives. Israeli security forces continued to stand guard. While they kept the situation under control, the sight of fires and encampments directly in front of the Prime Minister's residence sent a striking message. The atmosphere remained peaceful yet charged, with emotions running high. Political commentators observed that the growing movement had the potential to reshape Israeli policy. No longer just a national security issue, the hostage crisis had become a defining test of Netanyahu's leadership. International observers also took note, warning that Israel's image abroad could suffer if the government failed to act swiftly. Jerusalem remained tense as thousands of hostage families continued their demonstration. Fires in containers lit up the protest site, while tents and banners reflected the community's unwavering resolve. Their message was unambiguous. They would not leave until their demands were answered. The families declared that delays in negotiations equated to prolonged suffering. They pressed Netanyahu to approve a deal with Palestine immediately, framing it as a humanitarian obligation rather than a political choice. For them, public protest was not just an act of dissent, it was a tool of survival. Israeli security personnel maintained tight control over the protest zone, watching closely to prevent unrest. Still, the imagery of glowing fires, encampments, and chanting crowds could not be contained. It became a powerful symbol of civilian resistance, resonating far beyond Jerusalem. Analysts concluded that the demonstration could mark a turning point. Domestic discontent was colliding with international scrutiny, placing Netanyahu in an increasingly difficult position. The protests highlighted that the Gaza conflict was no longer solely military. It had evolved into a profound social and political crisis. The protests intensified, as thousands of demonstrators showed no sign of retreat. Families of hostages reiterated their determination to remain outside Netanyahu's residence until progress was made. The growing sea of tents and the persistent fires conveyed resilience, while their chants for peace echoed across Jerusalem. The message was urgent. Every delay heightened the risk to their loved ones. Families demanded that Netanyahu act decisively, not tomorrow, but today. Their stand was both a humanitarian plea and a direct challenge to the government's authority. Security forces remained on alert, yet the protests continued to dominate the area. The scene of thousands of demonstrators camped outside the Prime Minister's residence captured international headlines, amplifying global pressure on Israel's leadership. Political observers warned that Netanyahu's government faced one of its most difficult balancing acts. The protests symbolized not only public anger but also a pivotal shift in Israel's political climate. If ignored, analysts suggested, the demonstrations could escalate further and alter the course of policy in the days ahead. By nightfall, the protests reached their peak. Fires glowed around the tents, illuminating the determined faces of thousands of demonstrators. Television cameras broadcast the dramatic images worldwide, citizens defying their government at the gates of power. Families declared their determination to remain, no matter how long it took. For them, every passing hour was a reminder of the hostages' peril. They demanded Netanyahu take immediate action, framing it as the only way to end the suffering. Security forces stood firm, but could not overshadow the powerful symbolism unfolding before them. The crowd, the tents, and the flames created a tableau of defiance that no government could easily dismiss. Analysts concluded that Netanyahu now faced a defining moment. He could choose to address the demands of hostage families and pursue peace, or risk escalating unrest and deeper international criticism. The protests had transformed from a domestic demonstration into a global story, one that may shape Israel's political future in the days to come.